Hello, everybody. This is Ed Brenniger, and this is the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Tony Lockwood, and we're meeting for the first time, and I look forward to finding out about Tony and what he does and what's interesting about him. So welcome, Tony. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much, Ed, for introducing me and inviting me onto this unusual podcast. I think the concept that you've got is fascinating. The whole idea of having an introductory conversation live on air is brilliant, and look forward to seeing how the conversation flows today.
Well, I kind of see it as once we've had a podcast interview or conversation, then we'll be friends for life. And you can always call on me, and I can call on you. And there's just something, and it's so less formal. It actually opens up the possibilities that there are things that can come from this. So welcome, and glad you're here.
I totally agree. I think on my LinkedIn profile, I end saying something like, everything starts with a conversation. And it's a conversation, isn't it? So totally buy into what you're doing.
What do you think a conversation is? I mean, you have a podcast, and so you do this sort of unscriptedly too. So what do you see a conversation to be? I mean, I've never defined that.
It's a conversation focused upon a particular subject matter, which is organizational change and transformation. But it's a two-way sharing of information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The question, but then over the discussion, and it will lead us down different paths depending upon certain things or certain points that the other person raises, and it's that two-way sharing of information. I think that's how I would describe describe the conversation.
And how did you get here? How did you come to do a podcast? What was the motivation for you?
Well, I think it goes back to my career over the last 25 plus years have been in helping organizations, some local, some global, some large, some small, change and transform and move from one entity to another. And what I found when going through that is clarity around what do we mean by transformation management is probably not there that much. So it was an opportunity to start a conversation with people that have been like me, working in that sort of change and transformation world, so that we could start to share our thoughts and our understanding of what organization transformation is all about.
And what do you feel like you have learned through this process? What is there something that's kind of surprised you or kind of illuminated your awareness of something that you didn't know before?
Absolutely. I think it's like anything. I think you learn from every conversation you have, don't you? And the day when you feel that you know everything, it's probably the day to pack in. Certainly on every episode, although the subject matter has been the same, the discussions, should I say, have been completely different. And we pick up and discuss different aspects on each edition. Interestingly enough, a couple of people have said throughout the years that it started just before COVID in 2020. A couple of people have said, "Oh, there's a book in this, because you're bringing out all of these nuances, and you're bringing out all of this experience. Yeah, there's lots of books out there, theoretical books about how to change, but what you're doing within the podcast, it's very practical experience. It's experience-based. It's very practical elements that are being spoken about. You should pull it all together and put a book." And I've started to do that now. So I think and that the book is a compendium of all of the experiences that we've shared on the podcast, as well as the stuff that I can bring in from my experience over the 25 years.
Well, let's talk about change, and I like to talk about it as a transition. But Leo, let's talk about change, since that's been a major part of what I do is trying to elevate people's awareness that, well, one of my principles is oh, we're all in transition, every one of us, all the time. So
Totally agree. Yeah, and I think from an organization perspective, as well as individuals, is that you've got to keep transition. You've got to continue that transition. You've got to continue to move forward. Because at the moment you stop, you're effectively moving backwards, because the whole world's moving forwards. You're being left behind.
so so do you have different categories of change? Do you have and are you talking about different categories of change, different ways of changing, different effects? Is what you're seeing been kind of parsed out into these different ways of looking at it?
I think it depends upon the size of the changes. There is sort of the general business improvement type of activity, or personal improvement type of activity, which are incremental changes, and then the transformation that I'm talking about is much more disruptive. It's very focused, a deliberate departure from the status quo to some type of new paradigm, and that could be driven by acquisition. It could be driven by new market opportunities. It could be driven by just general innovation. We've seen that in many instances. You know, some of the largest companies in the world these days weren't around 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So, you know, and especially with technology these days, you know, the speed of change is getting ever quicker. And that ability for organizations and individuals to lean into those opportunities, I think does and will continue to differentiate.
So when you first began your career, um, how was, I'm not specifically thinking about change, but how was the average manager's life? What was that like when you began your career, when 25, 30 years ago? And what's it like now?
It was interesting. I had my background. My first career was in banking, one of the high street banks, and I got involved in a little bit of change as in the early stages, where we were starting to be much more customer facing, customer focused, much more of a sales type of organization. But the bank I was working for was a Scottish based bank, and I was working in one of the English regions, and we just felt that we were trying to position all of our products, all our services, with a Scottish mindset as opposed to what the English market wanted. So a few of us were quite vocal about this, and I got pulled in one day thinking that I was going to get a bit of a slap, stop being too vocal, and it was, well, the team's up in head office to put more of an English slant on what we do, which was fascinating. So for a couple of years, I went up working in product development, marketing, sort of communications world of this bank, and really tried to emphasize the distinctness of the two markets, and to develop materials that were relevant to the English market as well as the Scottish market. And then we brought McKinsey's in, the sort of global management consultants, to help us to what became known as create the new bank. And we basically systematically broke the bank down into its component parts and rebuilt it over a period of 4 or 5 years. And I was fortunate enough to get involved in some of those projects and programs. And at the end of that, I moved back into steady state banking as sales development manager for the whole bank, and realized probably after 6-9 months that the bug of change and transformation. So I left, and for the last that was 96. So what was it, 28 years now? I've been working sometimes in a permanent capacity, in most cases as a consultant. Yeah, fascinating. And I think what I learned from that is that irrespective of the size of organization, irrespective of the sector that you're working in, irrespective of whether or not you're a local organization, a regional or national or a global, when you break it down to its component parts, every organization is the same. It's got people, it's got processes, it's got technology. And what you need to do is move those forward from one state to another during a change and transformation piece.
Yeah, I agree. So what are you doing now? Are you still in banking, or are you doing something different now?
No, when I first left the bank, as I say, I moved into sort of a consultancy space, and I did a lot of work within financial services, um, and then I think, like a lot of people do, you have your network, and opportunities arise out of the network. I did a piece of work setting up a new bank, met somebody in there, and probably about 6 months later, I got a call completely out of the blue to say, could you come in work in this utility business in the UK? I said, well, I don't really know much about utilities. No, but you know about change. So we want that experience. So I moved into utilities, and since then, my variation has come from going into different sectors and different. It's been fascinating. So where am I up to now? Just finished a large interim role with a global firm back end of last year. Um, Writing this book, which transformation leaders body of knowledge. That's a sort of an early draft of it, and hopefully getting that out and published within the next couple of months. And in discussions now with a number of organisations to go and help them drive some transformation over the next sort of 12, 18 months. So yeah, it's for the first couple of months of the year, it's been about getting this book through the doors, really.
Which is a change process in and of itself.
Absolutely, yes, yeah, it is, and it's you just don't know how much knowledge you've got, or how much information you've got to hand
Yeah,
until you start writing and break it into its component parts.
yeah,
Which the first draft was relatively easy to produce.
yeah.
And the editing of that first draft has been really difficult, because we ended up having loads and loads of stuff that we really start to pull into, and get the real sort of nuggets out, and what we should stay in, we should leave out has been quite challenging, and fascinating process, but yeah, quite challenging.
Do you see another book in your future?
Well, it's a body of knowledge. This one is a body of knowledge, so by definition, it will have future editions, because the world's changing, as we've mentioned earlier.
Right.
So it will need to evolve.
Yep.
But yeah, there's, interestingly enough, as I've been writing this, there's been a few ideas that I've sort of sketched out to go for more of a deeper dive into one subject area. But it will always be in and around sort of the change and transformation piece.
How do you feel like you changed by writing the book?
Fascinating question. Not really given much thought to that. I think much more reflective, much more. Again, that realization that there's a lot of information out there when you look for it, and there's a lot of really experienced people that you can pull on if you know where to look, and lots of people are very, very willing to share their experiences, and I think all too often, as an individual, there's a tendency to feel that you're a bit on your own. You can't pull in that support, and Certainly when I was first pulling the information together to start to write the book, I reached out to the network and got a lot of really great information through. And as we're going through the editing, those people have come back in to help. So yeah, that sort of view that actually you don't have to do everything by yourself. Let's make use of the available resources that's out.
I found two things that came from writing, publishing my first book. One was I realized how little I actually knew. It was humbling. I thought I just mastered it, and I didn't. But it also led me to see how I now had a command on what I knew that was valuable, and and the and the work of editing, the work of writing several drafts, all of that is a discipline which is very valuable. And so let's translate that 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 practice, let's call it a practice or a discipline of editing, and let's apply that to our personal lives, or it could be the life of a business. Because I don't think they think in those terms that they're editing how they operate. They're not constantly. I mean, there is all this. There's Six Sigma and all these different improvement processes, but they're not seeing this as editing. They see this as something different. So let's imagine what it would be like if every manager and every CEO and every uh, office holder, saw that they were going to edit the way they did everything they did. And it may take sometimes a little bit longer for the work to be done, but it'll be better in the long run. What do you think about that?
I think it's that having that ability to reflect on where you are in life, and whether you are a complete new starter, whether you're 20 years veteran, or CEO, or graduate trainee. It's being having that ability to almost take yourself out of your body and look at yourself and reflect on where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And the point that you raised earlier about when you were writing the book, realizing that you don't know everything, and accepting that, one, you don't know everything, but equally accepting that you don't need to know everything, especially in today's world. That there's so much information that's available to you at a push of a button, and there's so many people that sort of. I remember going back to when I was in the bank, that the whole concept of the 6 degrees of separation, where you're only ever 6 people away from anyone
Yeah.
in the world, 3.5, certainly no. So you've got access to anybody that you want to have. So having that ability just to accept that, accept the vulnerability that you don't have all the answers all of the time, I think is a critical skill that people need to develop. And I think by doing that, you'll be able to build better relationships up with people. You'll be able to have much more sort of emotional connection with people, and that will help in the long term to deliver whatever it is that you're out there to deliver.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I would take it this step that it used to be that if you knew a lot, that was your superpower, and we look at who the experts are. I've been thinking about this, writing about this the last few days. We think about who these experts are, and they come on social media and they come on podcasts, and they say, "Well, this is what our research has told us," and I find that so much of that is just really highly reductive and too small and too narrow and not inclusive of the world or even a system. And so I think the superpower now is not what do I know, but how do I how to find what I need to know. that that having access to the information is far more valuable, and that tends to be having to do with who do I know, and because they are the ones who are going to tell me what I need to know, and then I'll translate it into some kind of form that I need to use it as.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a conversation I was having well, a couple of months ago with a group of friends, and we were talking about the education system
Mm-hmm.
and it's going through education these days, and that's not changed significantly since I was going through it 35 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. And that's frightening because the whole world's changed. As you say, you don't need to know all the things in all the ins and outs of how things work, or all of the historical dates that we're taught, because you can find those. It's the interpretation of that data, how you take that information and interpret it in today's world, or tomorrow's world, is what we should be educating people about, and how you can take a problem or a challenge, and the process that you should go through to start working through that. That's a life skill that we should be teaching kids that at school, and certainly in the UK, we're a million miles from that at the moment.
Well, we are here in the U.S., and we're still locked into the old industrial mindset of education, that we're educating people to fill a slot in an industrial business, and those jobs don't exist anymore. And it's very and it's interesting. In our family, we homeschooled our three kids,
Oh,
and
wow.
it began because my oldest son was an early reader, and we were living in a mountain community, and the school system really couldn't help him in first grade. And he'd take 2 minutes to finish an assignment where there were kids sitting at his table that would take 30 minutes, and he was bored, and so he asked us if he could learn at home. And so we went to the principal, and we said, this is the situation we find ourselves in, and we don't want him to become a problem because he's bored, and therefore will act out. So we'd like to homeschool him, school him at home. We weren't using that terminology at that point. And the principal thought it was a great idea. He says, well, why don't you do that, and then bring him back over here for things for the arts and PE programs, things like that, so he can maintain a relationship with these kids. And we did that for another year, and we found that those relationships really were being consistent outside of the school situation. And so it was interesting. But the complaint that was often given to us was, well, what about his socialization? Because they're thinking homeschooling, these kids are going to be isolated. Well, they weren't isolated. There were homeschool groups that we were parts of, 3 or 4 of these, and they were learning from a wider range of kids than they would in that public school. And I realized that we didn't have a very good philosophy of education. I mean, we're talking about, this is the 1990s and 2000s, but particularly the 1990s, and so it was an interesting time to go through that. And my kids became very independent, and they became very much learners on their own. My oldest son is a writer now, and I think what the thing is we have to give, and I think this extends to the age range. We have to give kids the opportunity to learn on their own and figure out what that means. But we need to provide that same sort of respect to the people that work for us, and say, oh, we have a problem. Well, why don't you figure it out and come to us and suggest a solution? You be our problem solver of the problem that you're most immediately affected by. And if we had that kind of social environment in businesses, I think they would flourish. And in many businesses, that they do have that kind of social environment.
Yeah, and I think in my experience, a lot of it goes down to the individual managers, and whether they find that their power comes from being able to take all of those problems and solve them, or whether their power comes from really building up the capabilities of their team. And it's a mindset, I think, in many instances. But I've always been that supporter of, I'm not taking this problem away from you. I'll support you, I'll help you, I'll guide you, but let's work through. You go away and do the research and find a solution for. Yeah. And if you need any help, or if you need any guidance, or if you need other people to get involved, shout up. But don't just pass the buck, because no one's going to win on that. And you just end up getting all these rocks on your desk that you can't get rid of. So work through them, and encouraging that, and providing that environment where people can fail, and it's accepted that if they fail, they're not going to get a slap. I think that demonstrates. So I think that results in people developing skills and experiences and confidence significantly quicker than any other way that I've come across.
So as we think about change and where it's taking us, what do you think about where we will be 10 years from now or 20 years from now? Because we're going through some dramatic changes in the world today, and I'm always curious to see what people think. And I'll say that some people have this grandiose sense of all the changes that are coming, and other people think, well, it's going to be pretty much the way it is right now. It's so there's not going to be much change. So I'm curious as to how you see the future unfolding because this is kind of be a monumental year globally because of all the national elections that are taking place. So it's going to set the stage for something pretty significant.
Yeah, I agree. I think this year will be instrumental. I think most of the major economies over the course of the next 12 months, which could create some political issues, and will create some environments that will impact on organizations' future. Coming back to the question about where do I see things going, I tend to always start from a view that's saying, okay, yeah, we're living in this world of constant change, fast change, but let's start with getting clarity about what's not going to change, what's going to be static. So, for instance, as an example, just to talk you through my thinking, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and the focus was on innovation in social housing, in the social housing sector, and looking at all the new technologies that are going to have this massive impact on social housing. And there's some fascinating developments, absolutely fascinating. But fundamentally, the thing that's never going to change is the fact that people will want nice homes to live in. So let's stay with that. That's what we're there to deliver. And yes, we can then utilize the new technologies, or we can utilize the new ways of working. But fundamentally, that's all about maintaining that status quo, which is people want nice homes to live in. So when I'm working with organizations that are looking at understanding what the future is going to look like, the starting point is, let's get clarity about the things that are not going to change, because those are usually our sort of core purpose for being. If you can get clear about that, you've got a real rock steady starting point on which to drive things forward. Well, and always coming back to, actually, yeah, is this helping us to deliver that core element or not?
Your statement of what is not going to change is very clearly a statement of what we value. And I see that, values are the things, the bedrock that we need to be clear on, because if we are constantly changing our values, then everything else just becomes chaotic. But if we say, how do we care for the people who are less fortunate? I have a long history of I'm a retired Presbyterian minister, if you didn't know. I began my ministry back in the 80s as a community minister. I was working with street people and alcoholics and homeless people, and the full gamut of urban life. But at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, what you want to do is how do we care for these people and provide for them the best we can in a manner where they can be responsible as much as they can for their life. And that's a challenging value to hold, but I think that's worthy of creating as a kind of a bedrock from which we can do all the other innovations from. So there's kind of a mutuality between, say, the state and other mediating institutions and the people who need us, and we have a mutual accommodation to one another so that we take care of people's needs.
Absolutely, and yeah, there's a. I think this is where Maslow's hierarchy of needs drops in, isn't it? That sort of foundation. That's never going to go away. Those two or three things are never going to go. As you go up the pyramid, then absolutely, new things can come and help us. But one, we need security. Two, we need substance. And if you don't have that and you don't have a base, everything else doesn't really matter.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time, and I typically, not always, but typically I ask with this one last question because I'm curious, because of the kinds of changes we're going through in the world. So, what is your hope for the future?
My hope for the future is well, on multiple levels, really. I've just had my first grandchild is about 18 months. We've got a second grandchild coming in a couple of months' time. And there's a point of me probably 12, 18 months ago, and it's like, God, the world's screwed, with all the things that are going on. So my hope is that the political leaders will start to see sense and start to see what everybody else, or many people within the general population, sees, that actually we've got more things in common than we've got. So let's start focusing upon the stuff that we've got in common as opposed to disagreements. Let's start to get much more emotionally intelligent than looking at being very, very aggressive. And let's, from bringing it back to change generally, let's lean into change. Let's not be afraid of it. Let's just get that mindset that I'm going to lean into it, because when you lean into it, suddenly you're involved in it, and it's not as scary as you think it is when you're outside looking into it. So I think macro level, let's start talking and let's start understanding what we've got more in common, and micro level in terms of change, let's get used to leaning into it.
I totally agree with you. I've said many times that when you're confronted with change, you should say yes and jump right into it, embrace it, because the faster you enter into change, the faster you're going to get through it, and the faster you get to the next one, and that the real pain and the real problems that we have are trying to resist change and trying to hold on to things which have kind of lost their vitality. So I totally agree with you, and that's where I have hope too, is that people will discover that they have a great more power to affect their lives and the world than they realize, and that's where they can embrace change, and that's a good thing. If we embrace change and we accept it as the transition, the natural transitions that we're going to go through, and as soon as it shows up, we embrace it and we act on that, then it takes us to the next change and the next change and the next change, so that it becomes very natural for us to go through this. And because what if we are constantly resisting it, we'll find ourselves in a difficult state where the changes that we are going to have to make ultimately are much more massive, much more great, have a harder, they're much harder to embrace. So I think just being willing to kind of go with the flow, that's another way of looking at it, is the right way to do it.
Agree. Totally agree. Yeah, I think that whole concept of leaning in is cannot be underestimated, and the benefit of doing that to the individual as well as the organization is just immense.
Yeah, it is. Well, Tony, how can people find you if they'd like to have further conversation with you?
So my LinkedIn profile is Tony Lockwood. So the usual LinkedIn /a/Tony Lockwood. I've got a community called the Transformation Leaders Hub.com. We've got this community of global community now of transformation leaders. The book's coming out, so it'll be available on Amazon and all the usual bookstores. And the Transformation Leaders podcast is available on all the usual podcast apps. So you can easily get hold of me on one of those, and I'd be delighted to explore and have more conversations. Bring it right back to the start. More conversations with want to explore this a little bit deeper.
Well, send me whatever you'd like me to put in the show notes, particularly in the book, because this episode will show in June, so maybe your book will be out by then. That would be
definitely be out by then.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
that is. Yeah, hurry up and wait, as they say. But we'll see. I mean, I'd love to be able to put that out there, and I'm happy for you. It's nice to finish a book, and they say a book is never finished, just abandoned. And well, I hope you have finished this so that you move on to the next thing, whatever that change brings to you. So,
I've been going through the editing. I think it's that mindset of if it's 80 there, then it's good enough. So having that,
oh, yeah.
I'm not trying to get to 100% because you never will, but 80% is good enough
to encourage you on that. After I turned my manuscript in the end of January of 2018, the book went through 6 edits. I still find problems in the text that they missed. So you can have a great editor, but it doesn't mean anything. Ultimately, there'll be things that they will miss, and we just laugh about it, and we move. It's just part of our humanity. But thank you for being on here. This has been fantastic, and I love to talk about change, and I think your approach to change is really sound, and I'm really glad that you've had a career at doing this, because that speaks well of you, and I wish you well in the future as you continue to take this message out to people that obviously need to hear it, and then so I wish you well.
Well, thank you very much, Ed. It's been delightful. It's been a really good conversation. I've loved every minute of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching the Eddy Network podcast. If you so inclined, hit the like button, sign up, and leave a comment, because we always love to hear what you have to say. And it's always encouraging, and it clarifies to us why what we do here is important. And so I thank you for the comments that you leave. And so we'll see you next time here on the Eddy Network podcast. Bye-bye.